This lecture will discuss what antecedents are in more depth, as well as how we learn to respond differently in the presence of certain antecedents, and how we can teach ourselves to respond to new antecedents. What is an antecedent? Most simply put, an antecedent is a stimulus that occurs before a behavior. So, what is a stimulus? A stimulus can be anything in our external or internal environment. It can be something that we feel, see, taste, touch, or hear. A formal definition states that a stimulus is an energy change which is registered by the senses. An antecedent can be something that cues or signals a behavior. The examples here we can consider our stomach growling to be a signal, an antecedent, that sets the occasion for us to look for something to eat. Seeing a stop sign up ahead while we're driving sets the occasion for us to engage in the behavior of pressing down on the brake pedal. Just as we call behaviors overt, external, and covert, internal, we can classify antecedents in this manner. Some are overt and we can contact them with one or more of our senses, and some are covert, meaning they are internal and can't be directly observed by another person. Antecedents can have different effects for different people, and have different effects for people at different times. The examples here show how different people may experience an antecedent in their environment, but the behaviors that follow can be very different based on our past history and/or our current state. Some people may see a sale and go immediately into the store to purchase something. Other people may see the sale sign and immediately go to their phone to verify if the deal is really that great. One day you may be very hungry and passing by a sign that says all you can eat, and it sets the occasion for you to go into the restaurant to eat. Another day you may have a bit of nausea, and seeing that sign can make you turn to look the other way. In much the same way, unless we have to go to the bathroom, seeing a sign for the men's or women's room won't set the occasion for you to walk in there. Some other characteristics of antecedents are that some of them can be immediate. They happen directly before a behavior, like running out of a building when someone says fire, or running to the window to look outside when you hear sirens coming down the street. Other antecedents are distant. They can occur at a much earlier time, but still set the occasion for certain behaviors to occur. The example here is that you get into a fight with your parents earlier in the day. So instead of coming straight home after work, you stay out late to avoid confrontation. Another example is sleep. If you slept poorly in the night before, it may set the occasion for you to try to take a nap later on or to avoid very strenuous activities. Some antecedents are unlearned, unconditioned stimuli. These would include a puff of air blown into your eye, getting a knock on your knee by the reflex hammer, feeling hungry and looking for food. But many antecedents are learned. We learn different antecedents through a process called discrimination learning. This is a process of learning where we distinguish between different stimulus conditions and respond accordingly. We learn these discriminated responses through related consequences, reinforcement and punishment. Young children often call all men daddy. This is because they have not yet learned to discriminate between different types of men. Through various consequences, for example, when calling the real daddy daddy, the child gets lots of attention and praise, but nothing when calling the man behind the grocery counter daddy. The example in the book talks about a young boy picking cherry tomatoes. He learns through reinforcement that nice red plump tomatoes taste good, and punishment that the small hard green tomatoes taste bad. He begins to understand the stimulus conditions, or antecedents, of a red, plump tomato should set the occasion for picking and eating, not the small green ones. A stimulus that sets the occasion for a particular response and signals that the response will be followed by reinforcement is called an SD. It becomes a cue to perform the behavior. Some examples of this in our everyday life is seeing a text message pop up on your phone from a friend that we want to talk to. Responding to this antecedent in the past has resulted in reinforcement, having a nice chat with a friend. A ringing landline phone also provides us with an example of an SD. When the phone rings, it sets the occasion for us to answer the phone, because in the past it has been met with reinforcement. hearing someone on the other end. We don't just pick up the phone and say hello without the ringing happening first. Conversely, we can also learn that certain antecedents are not associated with being reinforced for a given response, or may have been associated with punishment for a certain response. This antecedent becomes a cue for not performing the behavior. We call this type of stimulus an S delta. In the example before of the young child who calls every man daddy, he learns that engaging in that behavior in the presence of men who are not actually his daddy will either result in no reinforcement or result in some sort of punishment, being scolded or corrected or getting a dirty look. In this way, men other than daddy become S deltas for saying daddy. We also learn to respond to similar stimuli based on our past experiences. We call this stimulus generalization. We don't need direct teaching for the most part to learn to respond to similar stimuli. For example, you didn't need direct teaching to learn that the letters in Times New Roman font and Arial font are the same letters. We were able to generalize. Another important component in understanding how learning occurs is the concept of stimulus control. Stimulus control refers to the ability of an antecedent to influence a person's performance of a behavior. This can mean that a behavior only occurs when the antecedent stimulus is present. A good example of this is that we might tell some really great dirty jokes and get some big laughs from our friends, but we would not engage in that behavior if our grandmother is in the room. Trained police dogs' behavior is under tight stimulus control. When the attack command is delivered, then and only then will the dog attack. We experience stimulus control constantly. Think about the last time you were in a restaurant. Did you just yell out your order when you decided? Or did you wait until the waiter came over and asked you what you would like? The waiter's presence, an SD, set the occasion for your behavior, ordering. And stimulus control is demonstrated because it is only in the presence of that stimulus, the waiter, that you would engage in that ordering behavior. How do I identify if an antecedent is really connected in some way to the behavior? This can be particularly difficult as many stimuli occur just prior to any behavior. So which, if any, are setting the occasion for the response? My example here demonstrates my point. As I'm writing, my dog is barking. Immediately after my dog barks, I reach for my coffee and take a sip. Was the dog barking an antecedent that signaled me to take a sip of coffee? Probably not. Behavior analysts use something called a functional assessment to find true connections between antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. A functional assessment can be a very formal, actually testing the connections between antecedents, behaviors, and consequences through experimental manipulations, or it can be a relatively informal, with careful tracking of relevant antecedent conditions, behaviors, and consequences that follow in order to see if there are any patterns. We will discuss this at more length in coming modules. Sometimes it is necessary and useful to develop and apply new antecedents to change behavior. The most common way we do this is through prompting. Prompting is something that acts as a reminder to perform a behavior, or is actual assistance to perform the behavior. Prompts can come in many forms. Physical guidance, like a golf coach helping you practice your proper swing. Verbal prompts, repeating a phone number over and over. Visual, like a post-it note on your computer. Or auditory, like setting an alarm on your phone. Or finally modeling, showing someone the proper dance move that comes next. One important thing to remember is that when using prompting, we almost always want to fade the prompt so that the natural SD can take control. What this means is if we are trying to become really good golfers, we couldn't always have the coach providing full hand-over-hand assistance while taking our swings. We have to learn how to do these things independently. Another example would be when learning to drive. Often, when we are learning to drive, someone is right there providing verbal prompts, telling us what to do and what to look out for. Turn on your blinker, there's a stop sign ahead, check your speed. We need to be able to learn how to respond to all of those naturally occurring antecedent stimuli and for them to develop stimulus control over our responses if we ever want to become good drivers. Some other ways that new antecedents can be developed is by making environmental changes. By substituting a new environment, you may be able to avoid antecedents that were blocking positive behaviors or were increasing negative behaviors. For example, if you want to increase studying, but being in the same room with a TV tends to set the occasion for watching TV as opposed to studying. We can also alter the availability of things that act as antecedents to a specific response. If we tend to snack all day but don't want to eat junk food, substituting junk food with fruits and vegetables may help. The fruits and vegetables being out and in view can now act as the antecedent for snacking. One last note on antecedents. Many behaviors are complex chains of responses, each with their own antecedents. If we want to change a behavior that is made of one of these large chains, we can alter a link in that chain. For example, for cigarette smoking, the behavior itself is made up of many smaller responses. Going into your pocket to pull out the cigarette pack, opening the pack, pulling out a cigarette, going into your pocket to get the lighter, putting the cigarette in your mouth, lighting the lighter, and then finally lighting the cigarette. If we want to change that behavior through antecedent manipulations, we may want to alter one of those links in the chain, perhaps by building in some sort of pause or reordering the links, or adding some additional effort between responses. So, for the cigarette example, we may have the person count to 25 immediately after they've pulled the cigarette out of the pack. It is easier to alter the chain of events that lead to a behavior at the beginning or the early part of the chain.